The Admiral's spit landed on her cheek. His finger jabbed so close to her eye she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You woman who is your commander!" he screamed, veins bulging in his neck. "I want to know who's responsible for this circus!" She didn't flinch, didn't wipe his saliva from her face. Instead, Elena Hawkins smiled the kind of smile that made powerful men nervous. "He's watching, sir," she said softly, pointing toward the helicopter descending through the Hawaiian sky. "And he's seen everything." Pearl Harbor Naval Base, October 2024. The day a 22-year-old cleaning girl destroyed a 30-year career. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this one grabs you, make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss how this ends. They never saw her coming. That was the point. Elena Hawkins pushed her mop bucket across the polished floor of Pearl Harbor Naval Base's administrative building, her shoulders hunched in the universal posture of someone trying to be invisible. The coveralls hung loose on her slim frame, stained with cleaning solution and sweat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that might make anyone look twice at the young woman scrubbing floors at 6 in the morning. She was 22 years old, and she was about to burn down an empire built on lies. "Hey, you there!" Elena's heart rate spiked, but she kept her movements slow, subservient. She turned toward the voice, keeping her eyes down. Senior Chief Robert Hayes stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face twisted with irritation. "You missed a spot by the water fountain. Admiral Stanton walks this hall in 30 minutes. You want to explain to him why his base looks like a garbage dump." "No, Senior Chief." "Sorry, Senior Chief." "Sorry doesn't clean floors. Move it." Elena shuffled toward the water fountain, wringing out her mop with hands that had graduated top of her class from MIT at 18. Hands that had earned nuclear propulsion certification at 21. Hands that, according to her real personnel file, locked in a Pentagon safe, belonged to the youngest female officer ever commissioned as a submarine tactical specialist in United States Navy history. But Senior Chief Hayes didn't know any of that. Nobody did. She had been on base for 6 days now, living in enlisted quarters, eating in the enlisted mess, absorbing the rhythms and resentments of a facility that looked pristine on the surface, but rotted underneath. The intelligence briefings had prepared her for dysfunction. They hadn't prepared her for the fear she saw in people's eyes whenever Admiral Victor Stanton's name was mentioned. "He's coming, Admiral, on deck." The warning rippled down the corridor like a shockwave. Elena watched sailors who had been walking normally suddenly straighten, stiffen, press themselves against walls, as if hoping to disappear into the paint. She kept mopping. Admiral Victor Stanton rounded the corner with the momentum of a man who expected the world to part before him. 58 years old, silver hair cropped military short jaw like a granite cliff. He wore his authority like armor and wielded his voice like a weapon. 3 aides scrambled behind him, clutching tablets and documents, their faces tight with the particular anxiety of people who knew their careers could end with a single wrong word. "The Poseidon situation is unacceptable," Stanton was already shouting into his phone. "I don't care what the engineers say. That submarine deploys in 72 hours or I'll find people who can make it happen." He walked past Elena without a glance. She was furniture. Wallpaper. Nothing. Exactly as planned. But then his foot caught the edge of her mop bucket. Water sloshed onto the polished floor, onto his perfectly shined shoes. The corridor went silent. Stanton stopped mid-stride. His aides froze. 2 petty officers who had been approaching from the opposite direction immediately reversed course. Elena felt every eye in the hallway land on her. "What the hell is this?" Stanton's voice dropped to something almost worse than shouting a quiet, controlled fury that promised consequences. He turned slowly, his eyes finding Elena like a predator, spotting wounded prey. She kept her gaze on the floor. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean it up immediately, sir." "You'll clean it up? You think that fixes the problem?" "No, sir." Stanton stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and aggressive. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Elena raised her eyes, kept them empty, frightened. Everything he expected to see. "How long have you been in my Navy?" he demanded. 3 years, sir." 3 years, and you still don't know how to mop a floor without creating a hazard. He turned to his aides, gesturing at Elena like she was an exhibit in a museum of failure. "This is what they're sending us now. This is the quality of personnel I'm expected to run a naval base with." "Sir, Did I ask you to speak?" "No, sir." Stanton leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. "You women don't belong on my base. You can't handle the pressure, can't handle the discipline, and apparently can't handle a mop and bucket. If I had my way, every single one of you would be transferred to desk jobs where you can't cause real damage." Elena's jaw tightened. She felt the words rising in her throat, the credentials, the accomplishments, the truth that would shatter his assumptions like glass. But she swallowed them down. Not yet. Not yet. "Do you understand me?" Stanton demanded. "Yes, sir." "Get this cleaned up, and stay out of my sight." He walked away without another word, his aides scurrying after him like pilot fish following a shark. Elena watched him go, memorizing the set of his shoulders, the confidence in his stride, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. He had no idea. That night, Elena sat in her cramped enlisted quarters, her encrypted tablet casting blue light across her face. The message from Vice Admiral James Chen had arrived 3 hours ago, but she'd waited until now to open it. Reading the report. Situation worse than briefed. How deep does it go? She typed her response carefully, each word chosen for maximum impact. Deep enough to sink a submarine. Falsified maintenance records on the Poseidon going back 8 months. Reactor coolant systems haven't been properly tested. They're planning to deploy in 3 days. If that boat goes to sea, she's not coming back. The reply came within minutes. Evidence working on it. I need access to the reactor monitoring station. Can you get it? Elena thought about the layout she'd memorized, the shift schedules she'd documented, the security protocols she'd identified gaps in. I can get it. A long pause. Then, your father would be proud. Elena closed her eyes. Her father, Captain Richard Hawkins, who had died 6 years ago on a submarine that should never have deployed, who had stayed behind to manually seal a reactor breach while his crew evacuated, who had saved 37 sailors and earned a posthumous Navy Cross and left behind a 16-year-old daughter with a burning question. Why had that breach existed in the first place? She had spent 6 years finding the answer. Falsified inspections. Shortcuts taken under pressure. A culture of silence where admitting problems meant ending careers. Different base. Different admiral. Same toxic system that valued appearances over safety, politics over people. She typed one final message. He taught me what matters. These sailors matter. I won't let them die for someone's ego. Day 8 brought Elena her first real ally. She was cleaning the women's restroom in the engineering building when the door burst open and a woman in her mid-40s stormed in, uniform, disheveled face flushed with barely contained rage. Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos didn't notice Elena at first. She went straight to the sink, gripping the edges with white-knuckled hands, staring at her own reflection like she wanted to shatter it. "Pendejo," she muttered. "Arrogant, ignorant pendejo." Elena kept her head down, kept scrubbing the already clean counter. Invisible. Santos turned on the water, splashed her face, then finally registered Elena's presence. "Sorry, didn't see you there." "It's okay, Chief." Santos laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, it's not okay. Nothing about this place is okay." She dried her face with paper towels, her movements sharp with frustration. 20 years. 20 years I've served. I know more about nuclear reactor systems than anyone on this base, and that man treats me like I'm something he scraped off his shoe. Elena's heart rate picked up. This was exactly what she'd been looking for, someone on the inside who understood the problems and had tried to fix them. "Admiral Stanton," she asked carefully. Santos's eyes narrowed. "You're new here, aren't you?" "Yes, Chief. Transferred in last week." "Let me give you some advice." Santos lowered her voice, even though they were alone. "Keep your head down, do your job, and don't ask questions. Don't report problems. Don't suggest improvements. Don't do anything that might make someone higher up look bad." "Why not?" "Because the last 3 people who did are gone. Transferred early retirement or just broken. Admiral Stanton doesn't tolerate dissent. He doesn't want competent people, he wants compliant people." Elena took a risk. "What about safety concerns? If something's actually dangerous?" Santos cut her off with a bitter laugh. "I've filed 17 safety reports in the past 2 years. 17. You know how many were investigated? 0. You know how many resulted in any action? 0. You know what I got instead? A letter in my file about failure to maintain positive command climate. That's how it works here." Santos crumpled the paper towels and threw them in the trash with more force than necessary. "The Poseidon is a disaster waiting to happen. I've documented every violation, every shortcut, every falsified inspection. I've got a file 3 inches thick that proves we're one bad day away from killing 300 sailors. And nobody will listen." Elena's mind raced. A file. Documented evidence. Exactly what she needed. "Where's the file?" The question came out before she could stop it. Santos froze. Her eyes found Elena's with sudden intensity, searching for something. "Why do you want to know?" Elena scrambled for cover. "I just meant, shouldn't someone higher up see it? Someone outside the base." "You think I haven't tried?" "Every channel leads back to Stanton. He's got connections in Washington, friends who protect him. The system is designed to protect people like him and crush people like us." Elena held Santos's gaze. What if someone could get that file to the right people, people Stanton can't touch? A long silence. Santos studied Elena with the careful attention of someone who had learned to be suspicious of everyone. "Who are you?" Santos asked quietly. "Really?" Elena's cover identity demanded a deflection, a return to invisibility. But something in Santos's eyes, the exhaustion, the desperation, the dying ember of hope, made her take another risk. "Someone who lost family to this kind of negligence," Elena said. "Someone who's not going to let it happen again." Santos held her gaze for a long moment. Then she pulled a key card from her pocket and pressed it into Elena's hand. "Building 7. Storage locker 47. The combination is my daughter's birthday, March 15th, 2012, 031512. Elena closed her fingers around the key card. "Why trust me?" Santos was already heading for the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "Because you're the first person who's asked the right questions in 2 years, and because I'm tired of being the only one fighting." She was gone before Elena could respond. Building 7 loomed in the pre-dawn darkness, a squat concrete structure that housed base archives and storage. Elena had waited until 400 hours, the deepest part of the night shift when patrols were minimal and attention was lowest. The keycard worked. The door clicked open. She moved through darkened corridors, counting doors, until she found storage locker 47. The combination turned smoothly. 031512. March 15th, 2012. Someone's daughter. Someone's reason to keep fighting. The file was exactly where Santos had described it. 3 inches thick, stuffed with photographs, printouts, handwritten notes, and official documents covered in red flags and frustrated annotations. Elena began photographing everything her tablet's camera capturing page after page of evidence. Coolant system pressure readings that didn't match inspection reports. Maintenance schedules marked as complete despite work orders still pending. A pattern of lost supply requests that meant critical parts never arrived. Personnel transfer requests from experienced technicians who recognized danger and wanted out. But it was the last document that made her blood freeze. A reactor core assessment dated 6 months ago. The official version, the one in base records, showed all systems nominal. But this version marked draft, do not file, showed a hairline fracture in the primary coolant containment vessel. Annotated in red ink, requires immediate dry dock for repair. Deployment must be delayed minimum 8 weeks. Below that annotation, a different hand had written, unacceptable. Mission requirements supersede. Reclassify as cosmetic defect. Monitoring only. The signature was illegible, but the authorization stamp wasn't. Admiral Victor Stanton, commanding officer. Elena's hands shook. This wasn't just negligence. This was deliberate concealment of a critical defect that could cause catastrophic failure. Stanton had seen the assessment, understood the danger, and ordered it buried to meet his deployment schedule. He had signed a death warrant for 300 sailors to protect his precious timeline. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "You're not supposed to be there." Elena's heart stopped. Her eyes swept the storage room. Shadows. Silence. Nothing. Another text. Building cameras have been looped for the past 20 minutes. You have 5 more before someone notices. Who is this, a friend? Get what you need and get out. We'll talk tomorrow. Elena didn't hesitate. She photographed the remaining documents as fast as her hands could move, returned the file to its exact position, and slipped out of the building with 3 minutes to spare. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The friend revealed herself the next afternoon. Elena was cleaning the officer's mess when a woman in commander's insignia sat down at the table. She was wiping deliberately, positioning herself so that their conversation would be hidden from the room's security camera. Commander Patricia Reeves, executive officer. Stanton's second in command. "Keep cleaning," Reeves said quietly. "Don't look at me." Elena's cloth moved in slow circles. "You sent the texts." "I've been watching you since you arrived. You're good, the cover is nearly flawless. But you asked Chief Santos about the safety file. That's not a question a cleaning specialist asks. You're going to report me." Reeves laughed softly. "If I wanted to report you, you'd already be in custody." She paused, letting Elena absorb that. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone like you. Someone from outside this fishbowl. Someone who can do what I can't. Which is, take him down." Reeves's voice hardened. "Stanton has destroyed 11 careers since I've been his XO. Driven good sailors out of the Navy. Covered up violations that should have ended him years ago. I've documented everything I could, but he's got the system locked down. Every complaint gets routed through his office. Every investigation gets sabotaged. Then why stay? Because someone has to protect the people under him. Someone has to mitigate the damage until help arrives." Reeves's eyes finally met Elena's. You're the help, aren't you? Pentagon sent you. Elena made a decision. Half her cover was already blown. She needed allies more than she needed secrets. Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawkins, she said quietly. Naval Intelligence. Covert assessment of command dysfunction. Hawkins? Reeves's expression shifted. Richard Hawkins's daughter. You knew my father. I knew of him. Everyone did. What he did on the Cincinnati. Reeves shook her head. That submarine shouldn't have been at sea either. Same problems, same system failures, different admiral, same result. That's why I'm here. Then you need to know something. Reeves leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. The Poseidon deploys in 2 days. Stanton pushed up the timeline this morning. He's heard rumors of an outside investigation, and he wants that boat out of port before anyone can stop him. Elena's stomach dropped. 2 days, the reactor containment crack. He doesn't care. He's told the engineers to classify it as a monitoring situation. No repair required. That's insane. At depth, under pressure, 300 sailors dead, I know. Reeves's jaw tightened. I've tried everything. Official channels are compromised. He's got friends protecting him. The only way to stop this is to bring in authority he can't manipulate. I can get a message to Vice Admiral Chen, Pacific Fleet Command. Can he get here in time? Elena thought about the timeline. Messages, authorizations, travel. If I send the documentation tonight, he can be here in 48 hours. That might be too late. Then I'll have to make sure Stanton can't deploy that submarine before Chen arrives. Reeves studied her. You're 22 years old. You have any idea what you're up against? Stanton has survived 3 Inspector General investigations. He's got senators on his Christmas card list. He's crushed people with twice your experience. My father was 38 when he died, Elena said quietly. He was more experienced than anyone. It didn't save him because the system was broken. I'm not trying to work within the system, Commander. I'm trying to break the part of it that kills people. Reeves was silent for a long moment. Then she slid a small object across the table, a key card with a red stripe. Reactor monitoring station. My access code is 7724. The real readings are in the backup system, not the main displays. Stanton doesn't know the backups exist. Elena palmed the card. Why help me? If this goes wrong, your career is over. Because some things matter more than careers. Reeves stood straightening her uniform. And because I'm tired of watching good people die while bad people get promoted. She walked away without looking back. Elena finished wiping the table, her mind racing through possibilities. 48 hours. She had 48 hours to gather irrefutable evidence, transmit it to Vice Admiral Chen, and find a way to delay a submarine deployment ordered by a man who controlled everyone around her. The odds were impossible. But her father had faced impossible odds, too. He'd stayed on a dying submarine to save 37 lives. He'd taught her in that final act that some things mattered more than survival. She wasn't going to let 300 sailors die for an admiral's ego. Whatever it took. The reactor monitoring station was quiet at 200 hours, staffed by a single technician who was struggling to stay awake over his 3rd cup of coffee. Elena had timed her approach perfectly. The night cleaning rotation included this building, and nobody questioned a maintenance specialist pushing a supply cart through the corridors. She was invisible. Background noise, exactly where she needed to be. Hey, the technician said when she entered. Can you empty the trash? It's been 3 days. Sure thing. She moved through the space slowly, methodically, her eyes cataloging every display, every readout, every piece of equipment. The main screens showed exactly what the official reports claimed, all systems nominal, all parameters within acceptable limits. But Commander Reeves had mentioned backup systems. "You guys work long shifts here," Elena said casually, emptying a wastebasket. "Must be stressful watching all these numbers." The technician, his name tag said Henderson, yawned. "It's not that bad. These systems basically run themselves. I'm just here in case something goes wrong." "Does anything ever go wrong?" Henderson snorted. "Not according to the reports. Everything's always perfect. Admiral Stanton doesn't like problems, so—" He made a gesture suggesting things disappeared. "What about the backup monitoring? Doesn't that show the same thing?" Henderson's expression flickered, just for a moment. Then the professional mask returned. "What backup monitoring?" Elena had pushed too far. She retreated into her cover. "Sorry, I don't know what I'm talking about, just something I overheard." "Yeah, well." Henderson's voice had cooled. "You should be careful what you overhear around here." She finished emptying the trash in silence, but her mind was racing. Henderson knew about the backup systems. His reaction proved it, but he was too afraid to acknowledge them even to a cleaning specialist he'd never see again. The fear ran that deep. She was almost to the door when the main display flickered. Just for a second. But in that second, she saw something that shouldn't have been there, a pressure reading in yellow, not green. Warning level, not normal. Then the display stabilized, and everything was green again. "Did you see that?" Elena asked. Henderson's back was rigid. "See what?" "The display, it flickered." "Equipment glitch. Happens sometimes. Nothing to worry about." But his hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee cup. Elena left the monitoring station with more questions than answers. The backup systems existed, she was certain of that now, but accessing them would require more than a borrowed keycard. She needed someone on the inside who was willing to show her. She needed Lieutenant Marcus Webb. She found him in the submarine maintenance bay at 0600, supervising a crew that looked as exhausted as he did. The USS Poseidon loomed above them, her hull open for repairs that everyone knew weren't being completed properly. Webb was young 26, according to the personnel files Elena had memorized. But his eyes held the weariness of someone much older. He'd been on this base for 18 months, and in that time he'd submitted 23 safety reports, filed 7 formal complaints, and watched his career stall while officers who kept their mouths shut got promoted. Elena approached him with a clipboard she'd borrowed from a supply closet. "Lieutenant Webb, I'm supposed to get your signature on this maintenance verification." Webb barely glanced at her. "Which verification?" "Primary coolant system inspection. The one completed yesterday." That got his attention. His eyes snapped to hers. "That inspection wasn't completed yesterday. I filed for an extension because we don't have the proper testing equipment." "This form says it was completed. Admiral Stanton needs it for the deployment authorization." Webb snatched the clipboard from her hands. His face went pale as he read the document, a document Elena had found in the administrative building already signed by people who hadn't performed the inspection they were certifying. "This is a lie," he said quietly. "This is a complete fabrication. The coolant system hasn't been tested since April." "I know." Webb looked up sharply. "What?" Elena dropped her voice. "I know the inspection is fake. I know there's a crack in the reactor containment vessel. I know Admiral Stanton ordered it classified as a cosmetic defect to avoid delaying deployment." "Who are you?" "Someone who's going to stop that submarine from leaving port with 300 sailors aboard a floating coffin." Webb stared at her. The exhaustion in his eyes was giving way to something else, a desperate, fragile hope that Elena recognized all too well. "How?" he asked. "Stanton controls everything. Every report gets buried. Every concern gets dismissed. Every person who speaks up gets destroyed." "I have contacts outside this base. People Stanton can't reach. But I need evidence he can't explain away, not copies of documents, but real-time data from the backup monitoring systems. Webb's jaw tightened. You know about the backups. I know they exist. I need you to show me what they're recording. A long pause. Elena watched the war playing out on Webb's face, the fear of what speaking up would cost versus the knowledge of what staying silent would mean. If I do this, he said finally, and Stanton finds out. If you don't do this, and that submarine deploys, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you could have stopped it. Webb closed his eyes. When he opened them, the decision had been made. Tonight, 2300 hours. Meet me at the secondary engineering access. I'll get you into the backup monitoring room. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Webb handed back the clipboard with the falsified inspection report. You should know 3 other people have tried to expose what's happening here. None of them succeeded. 2 left the Navy. 1... He stopped. 1 what? Lieutenant Commander David Park. He was Stanton's deputy operations officer. He killed himself 6 weeks into the assignment. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. David Park. She hadn't known. The intelligence briefings hadn't mentioned a suicide. What happened to him? She asked. Stanton happened to him. 3 weeks of public humiliation impossible demands systematic destruction of his confidence. David was one of the best officers I ever served with, and Stanton broke him, made him believe he was worthless, made him believe dying was better than failing. Webb's voice had gone thick with grief and anger. He left a note. Said he was sorry for being weak. But he wasn't weak. He was crushed. By a system designed to crush people who see the truth. Elena felt the weight of her mission settle deeper into her bones. This wasn't just about preventing a disaster. It was about breaking a cycle of destruction that had claimed too many good people already. Tonight, she said. 2300 hours. Tonight. The day crawled by in an agony of waiting. Elena performed her cleaning duties with mechanical precision, her mind churning through contingencies and calculations. 40 hours until the Poseidon's scheduled deployment. Vice Admiral Chen was already en route, having received her emergency transmission overnight. But he wouldn't arrive until tomorrow afternoon, cutting it dangerously close. She needed to delay the deployment. She needed irrefutable evidence. She needed everything to go perfectly in an environment where nothing had gone right for years. At 1800 hours, she received a message that changed everything. It was from Commander Reeves, sent through the anonymous channel they'd established. Stanton suspects investigation. Deployment moved up to ZO 600 tomorrow. 12 hours. Elena's blood went cold. 12 hours. Not 40. Chen wouldn't arrive in time. The evidence she had might not be enough to stop an admiral with powerful connections. She typed back, "Can you delay internally? Already tried. Stanton's on a warpath. Everyone's terrified. What about Webb tonight's meeting compromised? Stanton's ordered surprise inspections of all engineering personnel tonight. Webb can't get away." Elena stared at the screen, feeling the walls closing in. Every path forward was being cut off. Every ally was being neutralized. Stanton was moving faster than she could adapt. But then another message arrived. There's one option. Stanton's holding a senior staff meeting at 2200. He'll announce the deployment acceleration. That's when you make your move. What move? Drop your cover. Confront him directly. Make him show his true colors in front of witnesses. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to stop him from killing 300 people. Elena set down her tablet. Her hands were shaking. 22 years old. 6 days undercover. Against an admiral with 30 years of experience and a system designed to protect him. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Some things matter more than survival, Ellie. Some things are worth everything. He had died living those words. He had stayed on a failing submarine when everyone else evacuated. He had given everything to save 37 lives. Now it was her turn. She picked up her tablet and typed 3 words. "I'll be there." The hours before the confrontation stretched like years. Elena stood in front of the small mirror in her enlisted quarters, staring at the reflection of someone she barely recognized. The cleaning specialist persona had served its purpose, but tonight that mask would shatter. Tonight, Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawkins would step out of the shadows and challenge an Admiral who had spent 30 years building walls around his power. She reached under her mattress and pulled out the dress uniform she'd hidden there since day 1. Clean. Pressed. Every ribbon in place, every insignia perfectly positioned. The uniform of someone who had earned their rank through excellence, not politics. Her phone buzzed. A message from Vice Admiral Chen. "Landing Pearl Harbor 1400 tomorrow. Can you hold until then?" She typed back. "Deployment moved to 0600. I'm out of time." A long pause. Then, "What's your plan? Confrontation. Senior staff meeting. 2200. Elena, that's extremely high risk. I know." Another pause. "Then I trained your father, 20 years ago when he was a young lieutenant who didn't know when to keep his mouth shut. He drove me crazy. But he was right more often than he was wrong, and he never backed down from what mattered." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. Chen's final message came through. "I'll be watching. Satellite feed of the base. Whatever happens, you won't be alone." She tucked the phone away and began to change. The transformation took 15 minutes. When she finished, the cleaning girl was gone. In her place stood a naval officer, young but unmistakably qualified, her posture radiating the quiet authority that couldn't be faked or borrowed. She checked the time. 21:47. 13 minutes until the meeting began. Her tablet contained every piece of evidence she'd gathered. The falsified inspection reports, the buried safety assessments, Chief Santos's 3 years of documentation, the reactor containment crack that Stanton had ordered concealed. Enough to end a career. Maybe enough to end several. But evidence alone wouldn't stop the Poseidon from deploying in 8 hours. She needed Stanton to reveal himself. Needed witnesses who couldn't be silenced. Needed to create a moment so public, so undeniable that even his political connections couldn't make it disappear. She took one last breath and walked out the door. The administrative building hummed with tension when Elena arrived. Word had spread through the base that something significant was happening tonight. Senior staff had been summoned without explanation. Rumors flew through the corridors like sparks from a fire. She passed 2 petty officers who did double takes at her uniform, clearly trying to reconcile the cleaning girl they'd seen that morning with the officer walking past them now. She didn't slow down, didn't explain. Let them wonder. Commander Reeves intercepted her outside the conference room. "You're really doing this?" It wasn't a question. "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. You could wait for Chen. Let him handle it through proper channels. By the time Chen lands, the Poseidon will be 12 hours out to sea. That submarine has a cracked reactor containment vessel. Proper channels won't bring 300 sailors back from the dead." Reeves studied her for a long moment. "You know what Stanton will do. He'll attack your credentials, your age, your gender. He'll try to destroy you in front of everyone. Let him try. You're 22 years old, Elena. You have your whole career ahead of you. Those sailors have their whole lives ahead of them. That matters more." Something shifted in Reeves's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Your father would have said the same thing." "My father taught me to say it." The conference room door opened, and an aide emerged. "Commander Reeves, Admiral Stanton is asking for you. The briefing is starting." Reeves straightened her uniform. Give me 5 minutes. Let him start his speech. Then make your entrance. Why? Because he's going to announce the deployment acceleration. Let him commit to it publicly in front of witnesses before you tear it apart. Make sure he can't walk it back. Elena nodded. It was good tactical thinking. Stanton would be most vulnerable in the moment of his greatest confidence. Reeves disappeared into the conference room. The door closed behind her. Elena stood alone in the corridor, counting seconds, feeling her heartbeat like thunder in her chest. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. She heard Stanton's voice through the door, muffled but unmistakable. The commanding tone of a man who expected obedience. The arrogant certainty of someone who had never faced real consequences. 4 minutes. 5. Now. Elena pushed open the door and stepped into the lion's den. 18 faces turned toward her. Stanton stood at the head of the conference table, mid-sentence, his expression freezing as his brain processed the contradiction between what he expected and what he saw. The cleaning girl from yesterday morning, in a lieutenant commander's uniform, walking into his senior staff meeting like she belonged there. "What the hell is this?" Stanton's voice cut through the sudden silence. Elena kept walking, past captains and commanders who stared at her with confusion, past Lieutenant Webb, whose eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been hope, past Chief Santos, who had somehow secured a seat at the back of the room and was watching with an expression Elena couldn't read. She stopped 3 feet from Admiral Stanton. "Admiral Stanton," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawkins, United States Navy Naval Intelligence. I'm here to inform you that the deployment of the USS Poseidon, scheduled for 600 tomorrow, is suspended pending investigation of critical safety violations." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Stanton laughed. It was the confident, dismissive laugh of a man who couldn't believe anyone would challenge him in his own territory. "Naval Intelligence, you expect me to believe that the cleaning girl who couldn't mop a floor yesterday is suddenly a lieutenant commander from Naval Intelligence. What you believe is irrelevant, Admiral. What matters is what's documented." She pulled out her tablet and placed it on the conference table. "This device contains evidence of systematic falsification of maintenance records for the USS Poseidon going back 8 months. It contains proof that a critical crack in the reactor containment vessel was identified 6 months ago and deliberately concealed on your direct orders. It contains 17 safety reports filed by personnel on this base that were buried without investigation." Stanton's face had gone from amused to furious. "This is absurd. I don't know who you think you are, but you just made the biggest mistake of your career." "The biggest mistake would be letting that submarine leave port with 300 sailors aboard a vessel you know is unsafe." "I know nothing of the kind." Elena tapped her tablet. "Authorization dated April 15th. Your signature. Ordering the reactor containment crack to be reclassified as a cosmetic defect, requiring monitoring only despite engineering recommendations for immediate dry dock repair." She turned the tablet so everyone in the room could see the document. "This is fabricated," Stanton said immediately. "Someone has created false documents to undermine my command." "Then you won't mind if we ask the engineering team to verify the current condition of the reactor containment vessel, right now, with independent witnesses." Stanton's jaw tightened. For the first time, Elena saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not quite fear, but awareness that this situation was different from the ones he'd controlled before. "I don't take orders from junior officers who appear out of nowhere claiming credentials they can't prove." "Then take orders from Vice Admiral James Chen, Pacific Fleet Command, who authorized my investigation and is currently en route to this base." Elena let that sink in. You can verify with a single phone call, Admiral, but I suspect you'd rather not make that call, because then you'd have to explain why you accelerated deployment by 36 hours the moment you suspected outside investigation. Lieutenant Webb spoke up from his seat. Sir, if I may, the concerns about the Poseidon's reactor systems are real. I've been trying to get them addressed for months. Nobody asked you, Lieutenant, Stanton snapped. No, sir. But someone should have asked. Someone should have listened when we reported problems, instead of burying every safety concern under paperwork. Chief Santos stood up at the back of the room. I've filed 17 formal reports documenting violations on this base. 17. All of them dismissed, all of them ignored. I've got copies of every single one, including the routing logs showing they reached your office and died there. Stanton's face was crimson now. His control was slipping, and everyone in the room could see it. This is a coordinated attack, some kind of conspiracy to undermine legitimate command authority. It's not a conspiracy, Elena said quietly. It's accountability. The thing you've been avoiding for 4 years. You have no idea what you're talking about. I've commanded this base through 3 Inspector General investigations. I've been commended by Pacific Fleet Command. I've got 30 years of service that speaks for itself. Your 30 years of service include a submarine that's about to deploy with a cracked reactor containment vessel. If that ship goes down, your 30 years will be defined by 300 dead sailors. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Commander Reeves spoke for the first time. Admiral, perhaps we should postpone the deployment until these concerns can be properly addressed. The crew's safety is my responsibility, Commander, not some child's playing dress-up. Elena didn't flinch. I'm 22 years old, Admiral, but I know the difference between a safe reactor and a ticking bomb. Apparently that's more than you can say. Stanton took a step toward her, his finger jabbing at her face. You listen to me very carefully, Lieutenant Commander, if that's even real. I've destroyed careers of officers twice your age with twice your experience. By the time I'm finished, you won't be able to get a job cleaning latrines on a tugboat. Is that a threat, Admiral? It's a promise. Good. I hope you made it in front of all these witnesses. Elena glanced around the room at the 18 officers watching the exchange. Because when the investigation concludes, I want everyone here to remember exactly what kind of man they were serving under. The conference room door opened. An ensign rushed in, breathless. Admiral, sir, there's an emergency in the reactor monitoring station. The Poseidon's primary coolant pressure is dropping. They're showing a containment breach warning. The blood drained from Stanton's face. Elena felt her heart stop. The crack she'd read about in the documents. The defect that was supposed to be merely monitored. It was failing. Right now. With the submarine still in port. That's impossible, Stanton said. The systems are all reading normal. The backup systems aren't, the ensign replied. Someone reactivated them an hour ago. They're showing pressure at 71% and falling. Lieutenant Webb was already moving toward the door. Sir, at 71%, we're approaching critical threshold. If that drops below 65, we're looking at a containment failure in the harbor. Stanton stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The supreme confidence that had defined him moments ago had shattered like glass against the rocks of reality. Elena took command. Everyone listen to me. Lieutenant Webb, get to the reactor monitoring station and coordinate emergency shutdown procedures. Chief Santos, I need you to contact all nuclear-qualified personnel and get them to the Poseidon immediately. Commander Reeves, begin evacuation protocols for all non-essential personnel within the blast radius. You can't give orders on my base. Stanton's voice cracked with desperation. Admiral, your base is about to experience a nuclear incident if we don't act in the next few minutes. You can either help me prevent it, or you can stand there arguing about authority while 300 sailors die. She turned to face him directly. Which is it going to be? The moment stretched. Everyone in the room held their breath. Then slowly something broke behind Stanton's eyes. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. His shoulders sagged, his hands dropped to his sides. Do what you have to do, he said quietly. Elena didn't waste time on victory. She was already running. The next 30 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Elena reached the Poseidon's reactor monitoring station to find Henderson, the technician she'd spoken to days earlier, staring at displays that now showed the truth instead of the carefully constructed lies. "Pressure at 68%, he reported, his voice shaking. "Rate of decrease is accelerating. How long until critical threshold? Maybe 40 minutes? Maybe less. 40 minutes to prevent a nuclear disaster in the middle of Pearl Harbor." Elena forced her mind to focus, pushing down the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Lieutenant Webb arrived seconds later, breathing hard from his sprint across the base. "I've got the engineering team mobilizing. What's our plan? Emergency shutdown. Full depressurization. We need to reduce pressure on that containment vessel before the crack propagates. That'll take the submarine completely offline. Weeks to restart. Better weeks offline than centuries of radioactive contamination." Webb nodded grimly and started issuing orders. Chief Santos appeared with a team of nuclear technicians, her 3 years of ignored expertise finally being put to use. "Tell me what you need. Get into that reactor compartment and start the manual shutdown sequence. The automated systems won't be fast enough." Santos didn't hesitate. She grabbed 2 technicians and headed for the submarine. Elena's tablet buzzed. A message from Vice Admiral Chen. "I can see what's happening. Emergency authorization transmitted. You have full operational authority. Whatever you need, it's yours." She typed back, "I need a helicopter, now. Already en route. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. If they could hold the situation that long, Chen would arrive with the authority to make everything official. If they couldn't hold it that long, nothing would matter anyway. "Pressure at 66%, Henderson called out. Too fast. The crack was propagating faster than they'd anticipated. Their 40-minute window was collapsing. Elena made a decision that would haunt her either way. "Henderson, can we reroute coolant flow through the secondary systems? Reduce pressure on the primary loop?" "In theory, but that's never been done outside a simulation. The stress on the secondary systems, will it buy us time?" Henderson ran calculations on his console, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Maybe 15-20 minutes. But if the secondary systems fail under the increased load, then we're dead anyway. Do it." Henderson initiated the rerouting sequence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the pressure readings on the primary loop began to stabilize. "Holding at 65%. Henderson reported, barely able to believe it. "It's holding." Elena allowed herself one breath of relief. Then, how long until Chief Santos has the manual shutdown complete? She's reporting 12 minutes minimum. And how long can the secondary systems handle this load? Henderson checked his readings. "Hard to say. These systems weren't designed for this kind of stress. Could be 20 minutes, could be 5. A race against time with 300 lives hanging in the balance. 12 minutes. She needed 12 minutes. She keyed her communicator. "Chief Santos, what's your status?" Santos's voice came back, strained with effort. "We've got the first 3 shutdown sequences initiated. The last 2 are stuck. Someone's been neglecting the maintenance on the manual overrides." "Can you force them?" "Trying. But if we rush this and damage the override mechanisms, we lose the ability to shut down at all." Elena closed her eyes. Every option carried risk. Every choice could be the wrong one. "Do what you can, Chief. Fast as you safely can." "Understood." The minutes crawled by. Elena watched the pressure readings like a hawk looking for any sign of instability. The secondary systems were holding, but she could feel them straining under loads they were never meant to carry. 8 minutes. 10. "Secondary system temperature rising," Henderson reported. "We're approaching thermal limits." "How long?" 3, maybe 4 minutes before automatic safety shutoff kicks in. After that, all the pressure goes back to the primary loop, which would fail, which would contaminate the harbor, which would manual shutdown complete. Santos's voice burst through the communicator. Reactor is going cold, pressure dropping across all systems. Elena watched the displays as the numbers began to fall. Slowly at first, then faster. The deadly pressure that had been building toward catastrophe was bleeding away into safety. The Poseidon wasn't going to explode today. She slumped against the nearest console, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Around her, technicians were cheering, hugging, some of them crying with relief. Henderson looked at her with something approaching awe. How did you know the secondary rerouting that's not standard procedure? They don't even teach it. My father taught me. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. He was on a submarine that had a similar failure. He figured out the rerouting, but by then it was too late for the containment vessel. He stayed behind to seal it manually. Your father, Captain Richard Hawkins, he died saving 37 sailors. I came here to make sure no one else had to make that choice. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the air outside. Vice Admiral Chen was arriving 45 minutes after everything had nearly ended. But Elena had bought those 45 minutes. She had held the line. Now it was time to finish what she'd started. Vice Admiral James Chen stepped off the helicopter with the authority of a man who had commanded fleets and shaped careers for 3 decades. His eyes swept across the scene before him. The emergency crews still mobilized around the Poseidon, the exhausted technicians emerging from the submarine, the chaos of a crisis barely averted. Elena met him on the tarmac, her uniform stained with sweat and coolant residue from the frantic hours she'd spent coordinating the emergency response. Report, Chen said simply. Reactor shutdown successful. Containment vessel held. No radiation release. 300 sailors still breathing. Chen nodded slowly. And Stanton, confined to his quarters at my request. Commander Reeves has assumed temporary operational authority. At your request. Chen's expression was unreadable. You're 22 years old, Elena. You just relieved an admiral of command and took control of a nuclear emergency. Do you have any idea what you've done? Elena's chin lifted. I prevented a disaster, sir. You also violated about 15 regulations, created a political firestorm that's going to reach the Secretary of the Navy by morning, and put your entire career on the line for sailors you'd never met. Yes, sir. Chen was silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Your father would have done exactly the same thing, probably with more cursing. He taught me well, sir. He did. Chen's expression hardened. Now comes the hard part. The crisis is over, but the reckoning is just beginning. Stanton has powerful friends. They're going to come after you with everything they have. I'm ready. Are you? Because what happens in the next 48 hours will determine whether you're remembered as a hero or court-martialed as an insubordinate officer who exceeded her authority. Elena thought about the 300 sailors who would go home to their families, about Chief Santos, whose expertise had finally been recognized, about Lieutenant Webb, who had found the courage to speak up, about her father, who had given everything so that others could live. I'm ready, she said again. And this time, she meant it. The formal investigation convened at IO 800 the following morning in the base's largest conference room, hastily converted into something resembling a judicial chamber. Word had spread through Pearl Harbor overnight, and the corridor outside was packed with personnel trying to catch glimpses of the proceedings that would determine the fate of their commanding officer and the young woman who had challenged him. Elena sat at one table, flanked by Vice Admiral Chen and a JAG officer who had arrived on an emergency flight from Washington. Across the room, Admiral Stanton sat with his own legal team, 3 high-powered military lawyers, whose presence suggested his connections reached further than Elena had realized. Presiding over the hearing was Rear Admiral Catherine Morrison, Inspector General for Pacific Fleet, whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for incompetence. "This hearing will come to order," Morrison announced. "We are convened to review the events of the past 72 hours at Pearl Harbor Naval Station, specifically the actions of Lieutenant Commander Elena Hawkins and Rear Admiral Victor Stanton. Both parties will have opportunity to present evidence and testimony." Stanton's lead attorney stood immediately. "Admiral Morrison, before we proceed, I must object to the fundamental premise of this hearing. Lieutenant Commander Hawkins conducted an unauthorized investigation using deceptive methods, assumed a false identity, and exceeded her operational authority by relieving a senior officer of command. These actions constitute serious violations of military regulations that should be addressed before any consideration of her claims." Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Noted. Vice Admiral Chen, response." Chen rose slowly. "Admiral Morrison, Lieutenant Commander Hawkins was operating under classified orders issued by Pacific Fleet Command with Pentagon authorization. Her methods were specifically approved to allow covert assessment of systemic command failures that had resisted investigation through normal channels for 3 years. Every action she took was within the scope of those orders." "That's convenient," Stanton's attorney shot back. "Classified orders that can't be verified." "They can be verified by anyone with appropriate clearance," Chen replied coolly. "Which includes Admiral Morrison. I've provided her office with complete documentation." Morrison nodded. "I've reviewed the authorization documents. Lieutenant Commander Hawkins's investigation was legitimate and properly sanctioned. We will proceed to the substance of the allegations." Stanton's face reddened, but his attorney put a restraining hand on his arm. Elena felt a small measure of relief. The first attack had been deflected, but she knew this was just the beginning. "Lieutenant Commander Hawkins," Morrison said, "please summarize your findings." Elena stood her tablet in hand. "Admiral Morrison, during my 12 days undercover at Pearl Harbor Naval Station, I documented systematic falsification of maintenance records, deliberate concealment of critical safety violations, and command decisions that prioritized political considerations over the safety of naval personnel." She activated the display screen behind her. This document, dated April 15th of this year, shows an engineering assessment identifying a hairline fracture in the USS Poseidon's reactor containment vessel. The official recommendation was immediate dry dock for repair, with deployment delayed minimum 8 weeks. The screen showed the original assessment complete with technical specifications and safety recommendations. This document, Elena continued, switching to a new display, shows the same assessment after it was modified on Admiral Stanton's orders. The crack has been reclassified as a cosmetic defect, requiring monitoring only. The recommendation for dry dock repair has been removed. The deployment timeline has been maintained. The difference between the two documents was damning. Murmurs rippled through the room. "That's a forgery," Stanton said loudly, half rising from his seat. "Someone has fabricated evidence to frame me." "Admiral Stanton, you'll have opportunity to respond," Morrison said sharply. "Lieutenant Commander Hawkins, please continue." Elena pulled up the next piece of evidence. "These are the maintenance logs for the Poseidon's primary coolant system. According to official records, full pressure testing was completed on July 7th, August 12th, and September 3rd. However, the base's supply records show that the testing equipment required for these procedures was out of service for repair from June 15th through September 20th. She let that sink in. The tests couldn't have been performed because the equipment didn't work, but the logs show they were completed anyway. Someone signed off on inspections that never happened. Who signed those logs? Morrison asked. Elena highlighted the signatures on the display. Various personnel, including Lieutenant Commander David Park, who served as Admiral Stanton's deputy operations officer until his death, 6 weeks into the assignment. The room went very quiet. Lieutenant Commander Park took his own life on August 23rd. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. His suicide note mentioned unbearable pressure and impossible demands. What it didn't mention was that he had been ordered to sign off on safety inspections he knew hadn't been performed. "Objection," Stanton's attorney said quickly. "This is speculation about a deceased officer's state of mind." "It's documented fact," Elena replied. She pulled up another display. This is an email from Lieutenant Commander Park to his wife dated August 20th, 3 days before his death. He wrote, and I quote, "They're making me sign things I know are lies. If something goes wrong, if people die, it'll be my signature on the paperwork. I can't live with that. I don't know how much longer I can live with any of this." The silence that followed was absolute. Stanton's face had gone gray. His attorney was frantically scribbling notes. "How did you obtain that email?" Morrison asked. "Lieutenant Commander Park's widow provided it to Naval Intelligence 6 weeks ago as part of a complaint she filed regarding the circumstances of her husband's death. That complaint was routed through normal channels." Elena paused. "Normal channels that led to Admiral Stanton's office where it was filed and never investigated." Morrison turned to Stanton. "Admiral, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Stanton stood, and for a moment Elena saw the man he must have been 30 years ago, confident, capable, the kind of officer who inspired loyalty and commanded respect. Then the mask slipped, and she saw what lay beneath desperation, fear, the crumbling facade of a career built on intimidation and politics. "I've served this Navy for 30 years. Stanton began, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of countless public addresses. "I've commanded ships, trained officers, dedicated my life to protecting this country. And now I'm being attacked by a 22-year-old who spent 2 weeks pretending to be a cleaning girl." He gestured toward Elena with undisguised contempt. "Look at her. She's a child playing dress-up, parroting accusations she doesn't understand. She has no concept of the pressures of command, the impossible choices that real leaders have to make every day." "Admiral," Morrison interrupted, "please address the specific allegations." "The specific allegations are fabrications," Stanton snapped. "Yes, we made adjustments to maintenance schedules. Yes, we reclassified some inspection findings. That's called leadership making practical decisions to keep the mission on track despite bureaucratic obstacles." "You reclassified a reactor containment crack as cosmetic," Elena said. "That's not leadership. That's criminal negligence." "You don't know what you're talking about." Stanton's composure finally cracked. "I've been dealing with impossible demands from Washington, budget cuts that left us without proper resources, personnel shortages that stretched every department to breaking point. You try running a naval base under those conditions and see how many corners you have to cut." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a detonation. Morrison leaned forward. "Admiral Stanton, did you just acknowledge cutting corners on nuclear safety protocols?" Stanton realized his mistake too late. His attorney was already trying to intervene, but the words couldn't be unsaid. "I acknowledged making practical adjustments," Stanton said quickly, "in consultation with my engineering staff, based on their professional assessments." Elena pulled up another document. "This is a formal objection filed by Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, your senior nuclear technician, dated March of this year. She specifically warned that the maintenance shortcuts being implemented could lead to catastrophic failure. She recommended immediate remediation." Your response, Admiral, was to file a disciplinary note in her personnel record for failure to maintain positive command climate. Chief Santos stood up in the back of the room. Permission to speak, Admiral Morrison. Morrison nodded. Granted. Santos walked forward, her 20 years of experience evident in every step. I've served under 7 commanding officers in my career. I've seen good leaders and bad ones. Admiral Stanton is the first commander I've ever served who punished people for doing their jobs correctly. She turned to face Stanton directly. You didn't want competent people, sir. You wanted compliant people. You wanted us to sign off on lies so you could meet your deployment schedules and look good for Pacific Fleet Command. And when we refused, you destroyed our careers. That's insubordination, Stanton said weakly. That's the truth. And you're hearing it because someone finally came along who couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be transferred, couldn't be broken. Santos nodded toward Elena. She's 22 years old, and she's got more courage than any admiral I've ever met. The hearing continued for another 3 hours, with witness after witness coming forward to testify about the climate of fear and retaliation that had characterized Stanton's command. Lieutenant Webb described the safety reports that had been dismissed. Commander Reeves detailed the career destruction she'd witnessed. Henderson, the reactor technician, explained how the backup monitoring systems had been deliberately disabled to hide dangerous readings. Each testimony was another nail in the coffin of Stanton's defense. But the most damaging moment came near the end when Elena presented her final piece of evidence. Admiral Morrison, I'd like to enter into the record a comparison of personnel outcomes at Pearl Harbor Naval Station under Admiral Stanton's command versus fleet-wide averages. The display showed a chart that made Morrison's eyebrows rise. In the past 4 years, Pearl Harbor has had the highest transfer request rate in the Pacific Fleet. Experienced chiefs and petty officers leaving at 3 times the normal rate, junior officers requesting reassignment after minimal tours, early retirements among nuclear-qualified personnel at 4 times the fleet average. Elena highlighted one section of the chart. Most significantly, Pearl Harbor has had 11 personnel file formal complaints about command climate during Admiral Stanton's tenure. Of those 11, 9 have left the Navy. One was Lieutenant Commander David Park, who took his own life. She paused, letting the weight of the numbers sink in. The 11th was Chief Santos, who only stayed because someone had to try to protect the sailors under her care. Morrison studied the data for a long moment. Admiral Stanton, do you have any response? Stanton looked at his attorneys, but they had nothing to offer. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were credible. The pattern was undeniable. I request a recess, Stanton said finally. I need to consult with my legal team. Denied. This hearing will conclude today. Morrison's voice was steel. We have a nuclear submarine with a cracked containment vessel sitting in dry dock. We have documented evidence of falsified safety records. We have testimony from multiple credible witnesses about systematic command failures. The Navy does not have the luxury of delay. She turned to face Stanton directly. Admiral, based on the evidence presented, I am recommending to Pacific Fleet Command that you be immediately relieved of all command responsibilities pending formal court-martial proceedings. The charges will include criminal negligence, falsification of official records, obstruction of justice, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Stanton's face went white. You can't do this. I have 30 years of service. I have commendations from... Your commendations do not outweigh 300 sailors who nearly died because you couldn't admit your limitations. Morrison stood. This hearing is adjourned. 2 shore patrol officers moved toward Stanton's position. His attorneys began packing their briefcases with the mechanical efficiency of people who knew their client was finished. But Stanton wasn't done. He shrugged off the shore patrol officers and strode toward Elena, his face contorted with fury. You think you've won, he hissed. You think this is over? I've got friends in places you can't imagine. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never command anything bigger than a rowboat. Your father was a fool who got himself killed, and you're following in his footsteps. Elena didn't flinch. My father saved 37 lives by staying on a submarine that should never have been at sea. A submarine that failed because of the same culture of negligence you've been promoting here. He died a hero. You're going to die a disgrace. You little Vice Admiral Chen stepped between them. That's enough, Victor. It's over. Walk out of here with whatever dignity you have left, or be dragged out. Your choice. Stanton looked around the room at the faces of officers who had feared him for years. None of them would meet his eyes. The power he'd wielded so carelessly had evaporated in the space of a single morning. He turned and walked toward the door, the shore patrol officers flanking him like the pallbearers at a funeral. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at Elena. You'll regret this, he said quietly. One day you'll understand the compromises command requires, and you'll regret destroying a good officer over a few paperwork shortcuts. No, Elena replied. I'll remember 300 sailors who are alive because I refused to accept your definition of good enough, and I'll never regret that. Not for a single day. Stanton left without another word. The room remained silent for a long moment after his departure. Then slowly Chief Santos began to applaud. Lieutenant Webb joined her. Commander Reeves. Henderson. One by one, the witnesses and observers who had lived under Stanton's tyranny rose to their feet, their applause building into something that sounded almost like celebration. But Elena didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted. Empty. The adrenaline that had sustained her through 2 weeks of deception and 2 days of crisis was finally draining away, leaving behind only the weight of everything she'd witnessed and everything that remained to be done. Vice Admiral Chen appeared at her side. You did it, he said quietly. You broke the system that killed your father. I broke one piece of it, Elena replied. There are others. Other bases, other admirals, other sailors living under the same conditions. And you want to fix all of them. Elena looked around the room at the faces of people who had finally been heard, finally been validated, finally been given the chance to do their jobs without fear. Someone has to, sir. Might as well be me. Chen studied her for a long moment. Your father used to say the same thing, right before he did something that made my hair turn gray. Did it work out? Usually, eventually. Chen smiled. Come on, we've got a lot of paperwork to file, and you look like you haven't slept in 3 days. I haven't. Then let's get this wrapped up so you can collapse properly. They walked out of the conference room together past the crowd of officers and enlisted personnel who parted to let them through. Some reached out to touch Elena's shoulder to offer quiet words of thanks. One young ensign, barely older than Elena herself, stopped her with tears in her eyes. My brother's on the Poseidon, she said. He's coming home because of you. Elena didn't know what to say. She settled for squeezing the ensign's hand and moving on. Outside, the Hawaiian sun was climbing toward noon, burning away the last of the morning clouds. The base was returning to normal operations, sailors and officers resuming the routines that kept the Pacific Fleet functioning. But something had changed. Elena could feel it in the air, see it in the way people walked, hear it in the conversations happening around her. Hope. That's what she was sensing. The fragile, tentative hope of people who had spent years believing nothing could change, finally beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chief Santos, engineering team requesting your presence at the Poseidon. There's something you need to see. Elena looked at Chen. I have to go. Go. I'll handle the administrative follow-up." She walked toward the submarine dock, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten. Whatever Santos wanted to show her, it was important enough to request her presence at a moment when everyone should have been celebrating. The Poseidon sat in dry dock, her hull still open from the emergency repairs, her reactor cold and silent. Santos was waiting at the base of the gangway, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Come aboard. You need to see this for yourself." They climbed through the submarine's maintenance hatches past equipment and cabling that told the story of a vessel caught between deployment and disaster. Santos led her to the reactor compartment where a team of engineers was gathered around the containment vessel. "We found something when we were documenting the crack for the investigation report," Santos said. "Something that wasn't in any of the records." She pointed to a section of the containment vessel that had been cleaned and illuminated for inspection. There, etched into the metal in neat engineering script, were words that made Elena's heart stop. R. Hawkins, inspected 03-15-2018. "Your father," Santos said quietly. "He inspected this exact vessel 7 years ago when the Poseidon was being built. Before Stanton, before any of this." Elena reached out and touched the inscription, feeling the grooves her father's hand had made. "He did his job right," Santos continued. "The vessel was perfect when he signed off on it. It only cracked because of the maintenance shortcuts that came later. Years of neglect, deferred repairs, ignored warnings." Elena understood what Santos was telling her. Her father's work had been good. The failure wasn't in his inspection, it was in everything that came after. The system that should have maintained what he'd built had betrayed him. Betrayed the sailors who trusted it, betrayed everyone who believed that competence and integrity still mattered. "He would have stopped this," Elena said quietly. "If he'd known what was happening, he would have done exactly what I did." "He raised someone who did it for him." Santos put a hand on Elena's shoulder. "That's his legacy, Lieutenant Commander, not the submarine that killed him. You." Elena stood there for a long time, her fingers tracing her father's inscription, feeling the connection across years and tragedy and triumph. She had come to Pearl Harbor to expose a corrupt admiral. She had found something more, a link to the father she'd lost, a purpose that extended beyond vengeance into something like hope. The Poseidon would be repaired, the sailors would deploy safely, the system that had failed them would be reformed, and Richard Hawkins's daughter would make sure it never happened again. The news of Admiral Stanton's arrest spread through the Navy like wildfire. Within hours, Elena's encrypted inbox was flooded with messages from officers across the Pacific Fleet, some offering congratulations, others warning her about the political storm heading her way. Stanton's allies in Washington were already mobilizing, demanding investigations into her methods, questioning her credentials, searching for any weakness they could exploit. Vice Admiral Chen had warned her this would happen. The crisis was over, but the war was just beginning. 3 days after the hearing, Elena was summoned to Pacific Fleet headquarters in San Diego for what Chen described only as a meeting that will determine your future. She boarded the transport aircraft with the documentation she'd gathered at Pearl Harbor, uncertain whether she was flying toward vindication or destruction. The conference room at Pacific Fleet Command was nothing like the hastily converted space at Pearl Harbor. This was where decisions affecting thousands of sailors and billions of dollars were made. The walls held portraits of admirals going back generations, each one staring down at Elena, as if judging whether she belonged among them. She didn't feel like she belonged. She felt like a 22-year-old who had gotten in over her head and was about to drown. Admiral Raymond Castellano, commander of Pacific Fleet, sat at the head of the table. His reputation preceded him, a submariner, who had risen through the ranks on pure merit, known for his intolerance of politics and his absolute commitment to his sailors' welfare. If anyone would give Elena a fair hearing, it would be Castellano. But he wasn't alone. Seated around the table were 3 other flag officers Elena didn't recognize, plus 2 civilians whose expensive suits screamed Washington politics. One of them was already looking at her with barely concealed hostility. "Lieutenant Commander Hawkins," Castellano began, "please be seated." Elena took the indicated chair, acutely aware of how young she must look, surrounded by officers with decades more experience. "You've created quite a situation," Castellano continued. "An admiral facing court-martial, a nuclear submarine in emergency dry dock, questions being asked at the highest levels about command accountability across the entire fleet." "Yes, sir. Some of my colleagues believe you exceeded your authority, that regardless of the outcome, your methods were inappropriate for a junior officer." Castellano gestured toward the civilians. "These gentlemen represent certain congressional interests that have expressed concern about the precedent your actions might set." One of the civilians leaned forward. His name tag identified him as Gerald Morrison, Special Counsel to the Senate Armed Services Committee. "Lieutenant Commander, I've reviewed the reports from Pearl Harbor. What I see is a 22-year-old officer who assumed a false identity, conducted surveillance on fellow service members, and ultimately relieved a decorated admiral of command without following proper procedures." "The procedures were followed, sir. My investigation was authorized by—" "I'm aware of the authorization," Morrison interrupted. "What concerns me is the message this sends. If any junior officer can claim special authority and start investigating their superiors, we'll have chaos throughout the military. Sir, 300 sailors are alive because of what I did. 300 sailors might have been fine anyway. The reactor situation was contained before it became critical." Elena felt her temper rising, but kept her voice level. "With respect, sir, the situation was contained because I exposed problems that had been hidden for months. If the Poseidon had deployed as scheduled, with falsified maintenance records and a cracked containment vessel, those sailors would be dead. That's not speculation. That's physics." Morrison's expression hardened. "Admiral Stanton has 30 years of distinguished service. His supporters believe he's being scapegoated for problems that existed throughout the Navy's maintenance system. His supporters should talk to the families of Lieutenant Commander David Park, who killed himself, rather than continue falsifying safety documents. They should talk to the 11 officers whose careers were destroyed for trying to report problems through proper channels. They should talk to Chief Santos, who spent 3 years being punished for doing her job correctly. Those are emotional arguments, not policy considerations. Policy considerations are what allowed this situation to develop in the first place." Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "Policies that protected senior officers from accountability. Policies that punished whistleblowers instead of addressing their concerns. Policies that valued political connections over competence and safety." Admiral Castellano raised a hand, silencing the exchange. "Lieutenant Commander, you're making serious accusations about systemic failures. Do you have evidence to support them beyond the single case at Pearl Harbor?" Elena took a breath. This was the moment she'd been preparing for since the reactor crisis ended. "Sir, during my investigation at Pearl Harbor, I discovered that Admiral Stanton's practices weren't unique. The falsified maintenance records, the buried safety reports, the retaliation against officers who raised concerns, these patterns exist at multiple facilities across the Pacific Fleet." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "This is preliminary data gathered from personnel transfer records, safety complaint logs, and maintenance audit discrepancies. It suggests that at least 4 other installations may be experiencing similar command climate issues." Morrison's face reddened. "This is a fishing expedition. You're trying to expand a single incident into a fleet-wide witch hunt." "I'm trying to prevent more sailors from dying, sir. If that requires examining uncomfortable patterns, then yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Castellano took the folder and began reviewing its contents. His expression remained neutral, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was seeing something that troubled him. "These facilities," he said quietly. "You're suggesting command failures at Pearl Harbor scale. I'm suggesting anomalies that warrant investigation, sir. The same statistical patterns that eventually led to my assignment at Pearl Harbor are present at these other locations. High personnel turnover, suppressed safety reports, maintenance schedules that don't align with available resources." One of the other flag officers, Rear Admiral Patricia Chen, no relation to James Chen, leaned forward. "Lieutenant Commander, how did you obtain this data? Personnel records and safety complaints are supposed to be confidential. I was given access to fleet-wide databases as part of my original investigation authorization, Admiral. The scope was initially limited to Pearl Harbor, but the patterns I observed led me to conduct preliminary comparative analysis. Without authorization to expand your investigation," Elena met her eyes directly. "Without explicit authorization, yes, but also without violating any specific prohibition. The data was available to me. I used it. If that was wrong, I'll accept the consequences." Morrison seized on the admission. "There you have it. She admits to exceeding her authority. This is exactly the kind of unauthorized action that threatens good order and discipline throughout the military. This is exactly the kind of initiative that identifies problems before they become disasters," Castellano countered. He turned to Elena with something that might have been respect. "Lieutenant Commander, you've put me in an interesting position. Your methods were unconventional, possibly unauthorized, and definitely uncomfortable for people who prefer the status quo. But your results are undeniable." He set down the folder. 300 sailors are alive. A commander who falsified nuclear safety records is facing justice, and you've identified potential problems at other facilities that warrant immediate attention. Sir, what happens next? What happens next is that I have to make a decision that will set precedent for the entire Pacific Fleet. Do I punish an officer for showing initiative and saving lives, or do I validate methods that could be misused by less scrupulous individuals in the future? The room fell silent. Elena felt her future hanging in the balance, suspended between the competing demands of institutional discipline and operational necessity. Morrison spoke into the silence. "Admiral, I strongly recommend formal disciplinary proceedings. Regardless of outcome, this officer's methods cannot be condoned." "Noted." Castellano's voice was flat. "And rejected." Morrison's face went white. "Admiral, Mr. Morrison, you represent congressional oversight, and I respect that role. But you don't command sailors. You don't send young men and women into harm's way and pray they come home. You don't lie awake at night wondering if the decisions you made will get people killed." Castellano stood his presence suddenly filling the room. "I do. And I'm telling you that Lieutenant Commander Hawkins did exactly what I would want any officer under my command to do when they discovered a threat to their shipmates' lives. She assessed the situation, gathered evidence, and took action when normal channels proved inadequate. But the precedent I'm setting is that saving lives matters more than protecting careers, including mine." Castellano turned to Elena. "Lieutenant Commander Hawkins, effective immediately, you are promoted to the rank of commander. You are also assigned as the first Director of Command Accountability Review for Pacific Fleet, with authority to investigate potential command climate failures at any facility under my jurisdiction." Elena's heart stopped. Commander at 22. Fleet-wide authority to do what she'd done at Pearl Harbor, but with official sanction. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do the job. Say you'll find the problems we don't want to admit exist. Say you'll protect my sailors from commanders who've forgotten what they're supposed to be." "Yes, sir, I will." Morrison slammed his briefcase shut. This isn't over, Admiral. There will be hearings, congressional inquiries. The Secretary of the Navy will hear about this. I'm counting on it, Castellano replied. Maybe it's time Washington started asking why admirals who falsify nuclear safety records have been protected for years, while the officers who exposed them were punished. Maybe it's time someone in Congress explained why Lieutenant Commander Park's widow had to wait 6 months for her complaint to be acknowledged. Morrison left without another word. The other civilians followed their expensive shoes clicking against the floor like retreat signals. When they were gone, Castellano's stern expression softened slightly. You understand what you've taken on, Commander? I think so, sir. You're about to become the most unpopular officer in the Pacific Fleet. Every commanding officer with something to hide will see you as a threat. Every politician with connections to military contracts will want you removed. Every comfortable bureaucrat who's been ignoring problems will pray for your failure. I understand. Do you? Because your father understood too. He made the same choice you're making: competence over politics, safety over career. It cost him everything. Elena's throat tightened. He saved 37 lives, sir. He did. And now you've saved 300. But the fight doesn't end with the lives you save. It continues every day against every pressure to compromise, to accommodate, to let things slide, because fixing them is too hard, or too dangerous, or too politically inconvenient. Castellano extended his hand. Welcome to the war, Commander Hawkins. I hope you survive it. Elena shook his hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a physical burden. I'll do my best, sir. Your best is what got you here. Now you have to make it sustainable. He released her hand. Admiral Chen will brief you on your new responsibilities. You'll have a staff, a budget, and the authority to make powerful people very uncomfortable. Use them wisely. The meeting adjourned, leaving Elena alone with Vice Admiral Chen and the echoes of a decision that would reshape her life. Well, Chen said after a long moment, that went better than expected. Elena laughed despite herself. It came out slightly hysterical. Better I just got promoted to a position that's going to make me the most hated person in the Pacific Fleet. Also the most effective. Castellano doesn't create positions for people he expects to fail. Chen gathered his materials. Come on, we've got a lot of work to do, and you look like you haven't slept properly in a week. I haven't. Then we'll start with getting you some rest. The fleet's problems will still be there tomorrow. They walked out of the conference room together past the portraits of admirals who had shaped naval history through decades of service. Elena wondered if her portrait would hang there someday, or if she would be forgotten like so many others who had fought necessary battles and lost. Sir, can I ask you something? Of course. My father. You said you trained him. What was he like back then? Chen was quiet for a moment. Stubborn. Brilliant. Completely incapable of staying quiet when he saw something wrong. He drove his commanding officers crazy because he never stopped asking questions, never stopped pushing for improvements, never accepted, "That's how we've always done it," as an answer. Sounds familiar. It should. You're exactly like him. Chen smiled. He would have been terrified of what you're about to face, and prouder than he could express that you're facing it anyway. Elena felt tears threatening, and blinked them back. There would be time for emotion later. Right now she had a fleet to protect. The news of Elena's appointment spread through Pearl Harbor before she even returned. Chief Santos was waiting for her at the airfield, her weathered face split by an uncharacteristic grin. Commander Hawkins, I like the sound of that. Chief, shouldn't you be supervising the Poseidon's repairs? The repairs are ahead of schedule for the first time in 3 years. Turns out sailors work faster when they're not afraid of being punished for doing their jobs correctly. Santos fell into step beside her. The whole base is talking about what you did in San Diego. Castellano creating a new position just for you. Congressional lawyers running away with their tails between their legs. It wasn't quite that dramatic. It was dramatic enough. People are starting to believe things can actually change. Santos's expression sobered. That's the most dangerous thing you've done yet, Commander. Giving people hope means they'll fight harder when someone tries to take it away. Is that supposed to be discouraging? It's supposed to be realistic. You've won a battle, not the war. Stanton's allies are already regrouping. I've heard rumors about congressional hearings, Inspector General reviews, challenges to the legitimacy of your original investigation. Elena had expected as much. Let them come. The evidence is solid. The evidence was solid against Stanton, too. It took a nuclear near-miss and 300 sailors' lives on the line to make anyone pay attention. Santos stopped walking and faced Elena directly. You need allies, Commander. Real ones. People who'll stand with you when the pressure gets intense. I thought I had you. You do, but I'm a chief petty officer. My influence only reaches so far. Santos glanced around, then lowered her voice. There's someone who wants to meet with you. Someone with resources and connections that could make a difference. Who? Jennifer Park, David Park's widow. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. David Park, whose suicide had been one of the catalysts for her investigation. Whose death had been swept under the rug by a system designed to protect commanders like Stanton. She wants to meet me. She's been following what happened here. She reached out through back channels, asked if you'd be willing to talk. Santos handed her a slip of paper with an address. Tonight, if you can manage it. She's been waiting a long time for someone to take her husband's death seriously. Elena looked at the address. A residential neighborhood not far from the base. A widow living with the ghost of a husband who had been destroyed by the same toxic leadership Elena had just exposed. I'll be there. Jennifer Park opened the door before Elena could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. She was younger than Elena had expected, maybe 30, with the kind of beauty that suffering had refined rather than destroyed. Her eyes held the particular emptiness of someone who had lost everything and was still trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Commander Hawkins, thank you for coming. Mrs. Park, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Jennifer led her into a small living room filled with photographs. David Park smiled from dozens of frames in uniform, in casual clothes, holding a baby that must be their daughter, standing proudly at his commissioning ceremony. A life frozen in images because the reality had been cut short. Please sit down. Can I get you something to drink? I'm fine, thank you. Jennifer sat across from her, hands folded in her lap, with the careful control of someone fighting to maintain composure. I've been trying to get someone to listen for 6 months, filing complaints, making phone calls, begging anyone who would take my call to investigate what really happened to David. I read your complaint, and David's emails. Jennifer's eyes glistened. Then you know. You know it wasn't just depression or weakness. They broke him. Stanton and his people systematically destroyed my husband until he couldn't see any way out except... She couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Elena said quietly. And I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too. How Stanton's lawyers are already spinning this as a witch hunt. They're saying David was unstable, that his complaints were exaggerated, that I'm a grieving widow looking for someone to blame. Mrs. Park, I have documentation that proves David was ordered to sign off on inspections he knew were fraudulent. I have emails showing the pressure he was under. I have records of other officers who tried to report problems and were punished. The pattern is undeniable. Jennifer leaned forward, desperate hope flickering in her eyes. Can you get them to reopen the investigation into his death? Can you prove that what they did to him was criminal? I'm going to try. My new position gives me authority to investigate command climate failures. David's case will be one of my first priorities. For the first time since Elena had entered the house, Jennifer smiled. It was fragile, broken, but real. He would have liked you, she said. David always admired officers who stood up for what was right even when it cost them. He tried to be that kind of officer. It's what got him killed. His example is what gave me the evidence I needed to stop Stanton. In a way, he saved those 300 sailors as much as anyone. Jennifer's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as 6 months of suppressed grief found release. Elena moved to sit beside her, offering the simple comfort of presence. "I thought no one would ever know," Jennifer whispered. "I thought he would just be another suicide statistic, another officer who couldn't handle the pressure. I thought the people who destroyed him would never face consequences." "They'll face consequences. I promise you that." "Be careful, Commander." Jennifer gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The people who did this to David are still out there. They'll do the same to you if they can." "I know. But I'm not as alone as David was. And I'm not going to stop until the system that killed him is burned to the ground." They talked for another hour, Jennifer sharing details about David's final weeks that hadn't been captured in any official report. The late-night phone calls where he'd broken down crying. The meeting where Stanton had humiliated him in front of his entire department. The moment he'd come home and told Jennifer he didn't know if he could keep going. Each detail added to Elena's understanding of how thoroughly the toxic command culture had destroyed a good man. Each detail strengthened her resolve to prevent it from happening again. When she finally left, Jennifer walked her to the door. "There's something else you should know," Jennifer said. "David kept files, backup copies of everything he signed, everything he was ordered to do. He knew someday someone might need them." "Where are these files?" "I'll get them to you. But Commander, the files include evidence about more than just Pearl Harbor. David was connected to officers at other bases. They shared information, tried to support each other. He knew about problems at facilities across the Pacific." Elena thought about the data she'd shown Castellano. The 4 other installations with anomalous patterns. "Are you saying David was part of a network of officers trying to expose systemic failures?" "I'm saying my husband didn't die just fighting for Pearl Harbor. He died fighting for every sailor in the Pacific Fleet. And if you want to honor his sacrifice, you'll need to finish what he started." Elena took the address Jennifer pressed into her hand. A storage facility where David's files had been hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to use them. "I'll honor him," Elena said, "and I'll make sure the people who killed him answer for it." She walked back to her car under a Hawaiian sky, brilliant with stars carrying the weight of a dead man's mission and the determination of a widow's hope. The war was far from over, but she finally had the weapons she needed to win it. 2 years changed everything. Commander Elena Hawkins stood on the bridge of the USS Poseidon as her submarine cut through the dark waters of the Pacific with the silent precision that had made her crew legendary throughout the fleet. The vessel that had nearly killed 300 sailors was now the safest, most efficient boat in the Navy, her systems humming with the kind of perfection that only came from crews who trusted their leadership absolutely. "Commander, we're approaching the rendezvous coordinates for the fleet exercise." Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, her executive officer, delivered the report with the quiet confidence of an officer who had finally found his place. The man who had once submitted 23 ignored safety reports now helped Elena run the tightest submarine in the Pacific. "Very well, XO. Bring us to periscope depth." The Poseidon rose through the water column, her movements smooth and controlled. Elena felt the familiar shift in pressure as they approached the surface, the transition from the submarine's isolated world to the broader reality of a fleet exercise involving vessels from 3 nations. Her tablet buzzed with an incoming message from Pacific Fleet Command. Commander Hawkins, Admiral Castellano requests your presence at Pearl Harbor upon completion of current exercise. Matter of significant importance. Details to follow. Elena showed the message to Webb. Any idea what this is about? If I had to guess, it's related to the congressional hearings next month. Your testimony is scheduled, and there's been a lot of political maneuvering behind the scenes. The congressional hearings. 2 years after the Pearl Harbor incident, Elena's reforms had spread throughout the Pacific Fleet and were now being considered for Navy-wide implementation. But success had attracted enemies as well as allies. Admiral Stanton's conviction had sent shockwaves through the military establishment, and some of those shockwaves were still reverberating in Washington. Whatever it is, it can wait until we finish the exercise. Elena turned her attention back to operations. Let's show our allies what this crew can do. The next 3 days tested every system and every sailor aboard the Poseidon. Simulated combat scenarios, emergency drills, coordination exercises with Japanese and Australian forces, the kind of intensive operations that separated exceptional crews from merely good ones. The Poseidon performed flawlessly. When the exercise concluded, Elena received commendations from the commanding officers of all 3 national contingents. Her crew had set records for response time accuracy and coordination that would be studied at naval academies for years to come. But the message from Castellano lingered in her mind as the Poseidon returned to port. Something was coming. She could feel it. Pearl Harbor had transformed in 2 years. The fear that had permeated every corridor under Stanton's command had been replaced by something Elena barely recognized: confidence. Sailors walked with their heads up. Officers spoke freely about problems without fear of retaliation. The maintenance bays hummed with efficient activity instead of desperate cover-ups. Chief Santos met her at the pier, newly promoted to senior chief and serving as the base's lead nuclear safety advisor. Commander, good to have you back. Good to be back. What's happening with Castellano? Santos's expression shifted. You'll want to hear it from him directly. But I can tell you this, it's not bad news. At least not for you. They walked together toward the administrative building, past crews working on vessels that would deploy on schedule with properly maintained systems and accurately documented inspections. Past officers who nodded respectfully rather than scurrying for cover. Past evidence of everything Elena had fought for becoming reality. The Pearl Harbor protocols, Santos said, noticing Elena's observation. That's what they're calling your reforms now. They've been implemented at 17 facilities across the Pacific. Safety violations are down 63%. Personnel retention is up 40%. The Navy is actually listening to the people who know how to fix things. It shouldn't have taken a near disaster to make that happen. No, but it did happen. And you made it happen. Santos stopped outside Castellano's office. Whatever he tells you in there, remember you've already changed everything. Nobody can take that away. Elena knocked and entered. Admiral Castellano was not alone. Vice Admiral James Chen sat beside him, along with Rear Admiral Patricia Chen and 2 officers Elena didn't recognize. The atmosphere in the room was charged with something she couldn't immediately identify. Commander Hawkins, please sit down. Elena took the indicated chair, her instincts on high alert. This wasn't a routine briefing. The presence of this many flag officers meant something significant was about to happen. Commander, Castellano began. I'll get straight to the point. The congressional hearings scheduled for next month have become more complicated than anticipated. Complicated how, sir? Admiral Stanton's allies have been working behind the scenes. They've convinced certain members of the Armed Services Committee that your investigation methods represent a dangerous precedent. They're calling for a full review of every action you've taken since assuming the Director of Command accountability position. Elena's stomach tightened. They want to undo the reforms. They want to discredit you personally in order to discredit the reforms. If they can prove you acted improperly, exceeded your authority, or fabricated evidence, everything you've built collapses. The evidence was solid. Every investigation I've conducted has been documented, verified, and reviewed by independent oversight. We know that, but politics doesn't always care about evidence. Castellano exchanged a glance with Chen. Which is why we've decided to change the game. He slid a folder across the desk. Elena opened it and felt her breath catch. Nomination for promotion to the rank of Captain, United States Navy. Recommended assignment, Commanding Officer, Naval Academy Leadership Development Program. Sir, I don't understand. The Naval Academy assignment puts you in a position where congressional attacks become much more difficult politically. You'll be training the next generation of naval officers, shaping the future of leadership throughout the fleet. Attacking you means attacking the Academy, and that's a fight even Stanton's allies don't want. Vice Admiral Chen leaned forward. There's more. The Secretary of the Navy has approved fleet-wide implementation of your accountability protocols. Starting next month, every commanding officer in the Navy will be subject to the same standards you established at Pearl Harbor. Elena stared at the documents, trying to process the implications. Captain at 24. Influence over every future officer who passed through Annapolis. Her reforms becoming permanent Navy policy. This is because of the congressional threat. This is because you've earned it, Castellano said firmly. The congressional situation accelerated the timeline, but the recognition was coming regardless. You've done more to improve command accountability in 2 years than the Navy accomplished in the previous 2 decades. Rear Admiral Patricia Chen spoke for the first time. There's also the matter of Lieutenant Commander Park's case. The investigation you initiated has concluded. Admiral Stanton and 3 other officers are facing additional charges related to his death, including conduct that contributed to the psychological conditions leading to his suicide. Elena closed her eyes. David Park. The officer whose death had haunted her investigation from the beginning, whose widow had trusted her with evidence that expanded the scope of everything she'd uncovered. Jennifer Park has been notified. She has. She asked me to tell you something. Patricia Chen's voice softened. She said, "Tell Commander Hawkins that David can finally rest. And so can I." The weight of those words settled over Elena like a benediction. All the battles, all the political maneuvering, all the enemies she'd made, and allies she'd found, it came down to this. A widow who could finally grieve without the burden of injustice. A dead officer whose sacrifice had finally been acknowledged. "I'll accept the promotion and the assignment," Elena said quietly. "But I have conditions." Castellano raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "My staff stays with me. Chief Santos, Lieutenant Commander Webb, the team I've built. They're the reason the reforms worked. They deserve to be part of what comes next." "Reasonable. What else? I want to testify at the congressional hearings anyway. Not as a defendant, not as someone being investigated, as someone explaining why these reforms matter and what happens when we ignore command accountability." The flag officers exchanged glances. Elena could see the political calculations happening behind their eyes, the risks and benefits of putting her in front of hostile congressmen versus keeping her protected in a prestigious assignment. "That's risky," Chen said finally. "Stanton's allies will try to tear you apart. Let them try. I've faced worse than politicians with agendas." Elena leaned forward. "Sir, the reforms won't survive if people think they were imposed by bureaucratic fiat. They need to understand why. They need to hear from the officers whose careers were destroyed, the sailors who almost died, the widows who lost everything because commanders forgot their responsibilities. You're talking about turning the hearings into a public trial of Navy leadership culture. I'm talking about making sure what happened at Pearl Harbor, what happened to David Park, can never be swept under the rug again. Castellano was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. You remind me of your father, he said. He never knew when to play it safe either. My father taught me that some things matter more than playing it safe. He also got himself killed. He saved 37 lives. I'd call that a fair trade. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises. Elena would be promoted. She would testify. She would shape the future of naval leadership while defending the changes she'd already made. But as she left Castellano's office, she found someone waiting for her in the corridor. Admiral Victor Stanton. He was diminished from the man she'd confronted 2 years ago. The silver hair had gone gray. The commanding presence had withered into something smaller, older, broken. He wore civilian clothes. His uniform privileges had been revoked, pending the outcome of his ongoing legal proceedings. Commander Hawkins. His voice was barely above a whisper. I hoped I might speak with you. Elena's security instincts screamed warnings. Stanton had every reason to hate her, every motivation to harm her if he could. But something in his posture. His eyes told her this wasn't an ambush. 5 minutes, she said. Here in the corridor where we can be seen. Stanton nodded, accepting the conditions. I came to tell you something. Before the hearings. Before everything becomes public and political and impossible. I'm listening. I was wrong. The words seemed to cost him physical effort. Everything you accused me of, the falsified records, the ignored safety reports, the officers I destroyed. I told myself I was doing what was necessary to maintain operational readiness. I convinced myself that the shortcuts were acceptable because the mission mattered more than procedures. The mission includes bringing sailors home alive. You forgot that. I know. Stanton's eyes glistened. I know that now. I've had 2 years in a cell to think about David Park, about the 300 sailors who almost died, about all the careers I ended because people tried to tell me the truth. Elena felt nothing but cold assessment. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm going to testify at the hearings, not in my defense against myself. I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, exactly what I did, and exactly why the reforms you've implemented are necessary. Of all the things Elena had expected, this wasn't among them. Why? Stanton's broken smile held no humor. Because my grandson wants to join the Navy. He's 17 years old, and he's convinced that serving his country is the most important thing he can do. I can't change what I did, but maybe I can help make sure the Navy he joins is better than the one I corrupted. Elena studied him, searching for deception, manipulation, any sign that this was another political maneuver. She found only exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. Your testimony won't save you from the additional charges. I know. I don't want to be saved. Stanton's voice cracked. I want to stop being the villain in everyone's story. Even if that means spending the rest of my life in prison, at least I'll have done something honest at the end. Elena considered his words. A broken man trying to find redemption. A grandfather hoping to protect a future he'd never see. A cautionary tale offering itself up as evidence. The hearings are in 3 weeks, she said finally. If you're serious about testifying, contact Admiral Castellano's office. They'll arrange appropriate security and coordination. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because your testimony might help prevent the next Admiral from making the same choices you did. Stanton nodded, accepting the distinction. Your father would be proud of you. I never met him, but everyone who did says the same thing. He was the kind of officer the Navy desperately needs. The kind of officer I should have been. My father died because officers like you didn't do their jobs. Elena's voice carried no anger, only fact. Honor his memory by helping me make sure it never happens again. She walked away without looking back, leaving Stanton alone with his regrets and his fragile hope for redemption. The congressional hearings began on a Tuesday morning in a chamber packed with senators, journalists, naval officers, and families of sailors affected by the Pearl Harbor incident. Elena sat at the witness table, her new captain's insignia gleaming on her shoulders, facing a panel of legislators whose expressions ranged from supportive to openly hostile. To her left sat Jennifer Park, invited to provide testimony about her husband's death. To her right sat Chief Santos, ready to describe the reality of serving under toxic leadership. Senator Morrison, a vocal ally of Stanton's before his conviction, opened the questioning with barely concealed aggression. Captain Hawkins, you were 22 years old when you initiated the investigation that led to Admiral Stanton's removal. You had been commissioned for less than 4 years. Do you believe you had the experience and judgment necessary to assess a 30-year veteran's command decisions? Elena met his gaze directly. Senator, I believe that recognizing a cracked reactor containment vessel doesn't require 30 years of experience. It requires the willingness to look at evidence honestly, regardless of who that evidence implicates. But you took extraordinary measures, false identities, covert surveillance, actions that some would characterize as more appropriate for enemy territory than a United States naval base. The covert measures were necessary because normal channels had been corrupted. 17 safety reports were filed through proper procedures over 3 years. All 17 were buried. Officers who raised concerns were punished, transferred, or driven out of the Navy. The system that was supposed to protect sailors was being used to protect the commander who was endangering them. Senator Harrison, a longtime advocate for military accountability, leaned forward. Captain Hawkins, can you describe what you found when you first accessed the Poseidon's backup monitoring systems? I found a reactor operating outside safe parameters with falsified readings being displayed to hide the danger. I found a containment vessel with a crack that had been documented 6 months earlier and deliberately concealed. I found a submarine that was scheduled to deploy in hours with 300 sailors aboard, none of whom knew they were being sent to sea on a potential coffin. The chamber fell silent. What would have happened if you hadn't intervened? Based on engineering assessments conducted after the crisis, the containment crack would have propagated under operational stress. At standard diving depth, the vessel would have experienced a containment breach within 72 hours of deployment. The resulting radiation exposure would have been fatal to the entire crew. 300 sailors. 300 sailors who are alive today because someone was willing to look at the truth instead of the paperwork. The testimony continued for hours, with Elena Santos and Jennifer Park painting a comprehensive picture of how command accountability failures had created conditions for disaster. They described David Park's deterioration under impossible pressure. They detailed the systematic destruction of officers who tried to report problems. They documented the culture of fear and silence that had allowed a nuclear submarine to nearly deploy with fatal defects. But the most dramatic moment came when Admiral Stanton himself took the stand. The chamber buzzed with surprise as the disgraced admiral, dressed in civilian clothes that seemed to diminish his former authority, walked to the witness table. His legal team had opposed his appearance, but Stanton had insisted. Admiral Stanton. Senator Morrison began, clearly uncomfortable with his former ally's presence. You've been convicted of multiple charges related to the events at Pearl Harbor. What do you hope to accomplish by testifying today? I hope to tell the truth, Senator. Stanton's voice was steady but worn. Something I should have done years ago. And what is that truth? The truth is that everything Captain Hawkins has said about my command is accurate. I falsified records. I buried safety reports. I destroyed careers to protect my own authority. I created conditions that nearly killed 300 sailors. The chamber went absolutely silent. I told myself I was doing what was necessary, that the mission required compromises, that leadership meant making hard decisions that others didn't understand. Stanton's voice cracked. But I was lying to myself. I was protecting my ego, my career, my legacy at the expense of the people I was supposed to protect. Senator Harrison leaned forward. Admiral, what changed? Why are you admitting this now? Because my grandson wants to join the Navy. Stanton's eyes glistened. And I realized that if he serves under commanders like me, he might not come home. The reforms Captain Hawkins has implemented, the accountability protocols, the protected reporting channels, the command climate assessments, those are the things that will keep my grandson alive. Those are the things I should have demanded 30 years ago. He turned to face Elena directly. Captain Hawkins did what I couldn't do. She chose the safety of sailors over the comfort of commanders. She chose truth over politics. She chose to be the kind of officer I always should have been. The testimony concluded with Stanton's full-throated endorsement of the Pearl Harbor Protocols and his recommendation for Navy-wide implementation. Whatever his motivations, genuine remorse, concern for his grandson, or simply exhaustion with fighting his words, carried weight that political maneuvering couldn't match. A decorated admiral admitting his failures and calling for systemic reform was worth more than 100 policy papers. 6 months later, Captain Elena Hawkins stood before the graduating class at the United States Naval Academy, preparing to deliver the commencement address that would launch a new generation of officers into the fleet. The midshipmen sat in perfect rows, their white uniforms gleaming in the spring sunlight, their faces filled with the particular combination of pride and anxiety that marked the transition from student to officer. Among them sat 1,700 young men and women who would carry the Navy's future on their shoulders. Elena thought about her own commissioning ceremony 6 years ago. She'd been younger than any of these graduates, already carrying the weight of her father's legacy and the burning determination to prevent others from dying the way he had. She hadn't known then that her path would lead here to a position where she could shape how these young officers understood leadership accountability and the sacred responsibility they were about to assume. 6 years ago, Elena began, her voice carrying across the assembly. I stood where you're sitting now, wondering if I had what it took to lead sailors in the most demanding service in the world. I wondered if my training was adequate, if my judgment was sound, if I would measure up to the officers who had come before me. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled midshipmen. What I didn't understand then, what I had to learn through experience, was that leadership isn't about measuring up to the officers who came before you. It's about protecting the sailors who serve under you, even when that protection requires challenging the very institutions you've sworn to serve. Elena described Pearl Harbor, not the sanitized version that appeared in official reports, but the human reality. The fear in Chief Santos's eyes when she talked about ignored safety reports. The desperation in Lieutenant Webb's voice when he tried to explain why his concerns had been dismissed. The crack in David Park's marriage, his spirit, his will to live under the weight of orders he couldn't follow without betraying everything he believed. Lieutenant Commander Park died because he couldn't reconcile his duty to follow orders with his duty to protect his shipmates. He was caught between a system that demanded compliance and a conscience that demanded truth, and the system killed him. The assembly was absolutely silent. Today, you're joining that system. You're becoming part of an institution that has incredible capacity for both good and harm. The Navy can project power across oceans, defend nations, rescue the desperate, and maintain peace through strength. But the Navy can also destroy the people within it if leaders forget that their authority exists to protect sailors, not to protect themselves. Elena's voice strengthened. The Pearl Harbor Protocols exist because good people, brave people, were willing to tell the truth when lying was easier. They exist because Chief Santos filed 17 reports she knew would be ignored because she couldn't live with staying silent. They exist because Lieutenant Commander Park kept records he knew might destroy him because someone someday might need them. She looked directly at the graduating class. Today, you inherit their legacy, not just the protocols and procedures, but the responsibility to speak truth when truth is dangerous. To protect your sailors when protecting them is costly. To be the kind of officers who would rather end their careers than end their integrity. Elena reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small object, a challenge coin bearing the insignia of the USS Poseidon and the inscription, "Safety first, always." This coin belonged to my father. He carried it on the submarine where he died, saving 37 sailors. He gave everything so that others could live. That's what real leadership costs. That's the standard you're inheriting. She placed the coin on the podium. When you face your first impossible choice, when you're ordered to cut corners to stay silent, to prioritize politics over people, remember what that choice cost, David Park. Remember what it cost the sailors who almost died on the Poseidon. Remember what it cost my father. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried across the entire assembly. And then do the right thing anyway, because you swore an oath to the Constitution, to the Navy, and to the sailors who will trust you with their lives. That oath doesn't have exceptions for convenience. It doesn't have escape clauses for career protection. It demands everything you have every single day for as long as you wear that uniform. Elena straightened her voice, rising with conviction. You are the future of the United States Navy. Make it worthy of the people who serve. Make it worthy of the sacrifices that built it. Make it worthy of the trust that families place in you when they send their sons and daughters to sea. She looked out at 1,700 faces, seeing in them the officers who would command ships, lead sailors, and shape the Navy for generations to come. Make it better than what you inherited. That's the only legacy that matters. The applause began slowly, then built into something thunderous. Midshipmen rose to their feet, their cheers echoing across the grounds of the institution that had trained naval officers for nearly 2 centuries. Elena stood at the podium, feeling her father's coin under her fingers, thinking about everyone who had brought her to this moment. Chief Santos, who had trusted her with evidence that could have ended both their careers. Marcus Webb, who had found his courage when it mattered most. Jennifer Park, who had shared her husband's files when sharing them, was an act of faith. Even Victor Stanton, who had found the remnants of honor in his final public act. The question Admiral Stanton had screamed at her 2 years ago echoed in her memory. You woman, who is your commander? The answer had always been the same. Her commander was the oath she'd sworn. Her commander was the responsibility she carried. Her commander was every sailor who trusted that their leaders would bring them home alive. And standing before the next generation of naval officers, Elena knew that trust would never be betrayed again. Not on her watch. Not ever. The legacy of Pearl Harbor was no longer about disaster averted. It was about transformation achieved. It was about a 22-year-old cleaning girl who had become the conscience of the Pacific Fleet. It was about systems that protected sailors instead of commanders, truth instead of politics, integrity instead of convenience. It was about a navy finally worthy of the people who served it. And Elena Hawkins, Captain. Elena Hawkins would spend the rest of her career making sure it stayed that way. Because some things mattered more than careers. Some things mattered more than politics. Some things mattered more than survival. Her father had taught her that. Now she would teach the Navy.